So this is 4.1D is in delta in trigonometry, graphs of the sine and cosine functions. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start looking at y equals the sine of a number times x. Okay, so what we've got here is top of page 136. There's a chart here. I like the chart. I don't like how they explain it, so we'll see if we can make this work. Our x value is where our number is going to be along the x-axis. So we're starting here at 0. Let me get some color in here. So we've got a number there, 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that 0 and say the sine of, and we'll use 2x, and let's see if we can graph the sine of 2x. So we're going to take the sine of 2 times 0. So the sine of 0 is 0. Now we're going to take, well, let's take pi. Let's put pi here. And let's take the sine of 2 times pi, because that's our x. When we take the sine of 2 times pi, we get 0. I'm going to need some different colors here. We get 0. When I take pi over 2, let's do the in-between here. I take the sine, my x is pi over 2, and the sine of 2 times pi over 2 would be, these will cross out, we take the sine of just pi. So the sine of pi then would be 0. And let's take the sine of pi over, let's use pi over 4. Pi over 4 is right there. Halfway between this 0 and this pi over 2. It's halfway, so that's pi over 4. And it says we're going to multiply that by 2. So this becomes the sine of pi over 2. Sine of pi over 2 is 1. So at pi over 4, we're going to be at 1. Okay, so see what we're doing here. We're taking these as our x's, we're plugging them in for here, multiplying them by 2 and taking the sine of this. And that ends up being our y value. So that's what they did up here. They plugged in an x, pi over 4 is their x, so they went over pi over 4. Then they took that pi over 4 and put it in here for x, multiplied it by 2 and got pi over 2, took the sine of pi over 2 and got 1. So when we take our x value, multiply it by the number in front of the x here, and then take the sine of the whole thing, this is the number we get. So that's very, very important, because we're going to be making some crazy tables here later, and you have to be able to understand what's going on here. So my x value, 3 pi over 4. That means I'm going to be over here, 3 pi over 4, which in this case is going to be about right there. So I've got my x value there. I need to know how far up or down I go from there. So I take my 3 pi over 4 and I put it in here. Multiply it by 2. 2 times 3 pi over 4 is 6 pi over 4. In 6 pi over 4, let's go ahead and write that. Sine of 2 times 3 pi over 4. I multiply that out and I get 6 pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 2. Now I'm going to take the sine of 3 pi over 2. When I take the sine of 3 pi over 2, I'm going to get negative 1. So that's where that negative 1 came from. We did not take the sine of 3 pi over 4 because it didn't ask us to do that. For the y value, it told us to take 3 pi over 4 times 2 and then take the sine of it, which would give us this number here. Okay? Same happened down here. We took pi over 4, we put it in here, and it said, okay, pi over 4 in for x, the sine of 4 times pi over 4. So sine of 4 times pi over 4, those will cancel. So actually what we're looking at is the sine of pi. So when we put pi over 4 in here, multiply it by 4, take the sine of it, we get 0. Because notice here we got a 1, here we got a 0, so there must be something different in that. That was, here we multiplied pi over 4 times 2, here we multiplied pi over 4 times 4. So our sign is going to be different. And again, this has to be in radians in your calculator. It can't be in degrees. So whenever you're dealing with pi's, you have to be in radians.